Sup, and welcome to A Random Review. Established November 2021, concluded, later. And today, I'm reviewing something a little unorthodox, in that it's a movie based on a series of video games that I found myself really interested in seeing recently, even though I'd never actually played any of those games before. And that movie is the first theatrical adaptation of Silent Hill, which came out in 2006 and was directed by a French director named Christophe Gans. The reason I wanted to watch this is because even though I hadn't played Silent Hill before, which in case you don't know is a survival horror game that was released on the PlayStation in 1999, I was very familiar with the music from the games. I was browsing YouTube one day when I stumbled upon the soundtracks from the first few games, which were composed by Akira Yamaoka, and the music from those games is really awesome. It's this ambient score that's very soft and relaxing. It has a really different tone than what you'd normally get from something horror-related. A lot of horror music is very aggressive and very grungy, and it's trying to force you to be scared more than anything. But that's not the case with the Silent Hill music. It's eerie, but not so eerie that you can't also listen to it in the background while you're doing something else. And I fell in love with this music, so much so that I found myself wanting to learn more about Silent Hill and what it was that this music was accompanying. So I watched a couple Let's Plays of people playing the games, and eventually I got it in my head that so long as I was watching things about the games, I might as well watch a movie based on the game, which is why I checked out the 2006 film. This movie is about a woman named Rose Da Silva, played by Radha Mitchell, who winds up in a creepy town called Silent Hill that exists in a parallel plane of reality in which there are horrific monsters and there's a mist everywhere and reality is constantly shifting and the few people who live there are all incredibly strange. And when Rose gets to Silent Hill, she loses track of her young daughter, who she came there with, and so the rest of the movie is about Rose trying to stay alive with the help of a police officer named Sybil, and relocate her daughter, and then escape, if it's even possible to escape. The movie is mostly an adaptation of the first Silent Hill game, but it takes bits and pieces from both Silent Hill 1 and Silent Hill 2, like Pyramid Head, who's the big villain of the game series and who was introduced in Silent Hill 2, appears in this movie. And some of the characters in the movie are remixes of the characters that are in the games. And even the world of Silent Hill is a little different here. In the first game, it's snowing in Silent Hill. But in the movie, they made it so that it's like Centralia, that the town was abandoned because there's a fire perpetually raging underneath it. And so instead of snow falling from the sky, it's actually ash that's falling on people, which I thought was a really cool interpretation, especially because I've always found Centralia to be incredibly interesting. Like, the fact that an abandoned town in Pennsylvania was the basis of the Silent Hill in this movie, as confirmed by the writer of this movie, is fascinating to me. And if you've never heard of Centralia, go look it up. It's pretty damn interesting. But anyway, the first thing that impressed me about this movie is how great it looks and sounds. Christophe Gans was not a prolific director. His filmography is surprisingly sparse, and yet you'd never know it because the aesthetics of this movie, from a production standpoint, are excellent. Not only does this town look just like the Silent Hill from the games to a painstaking degree, there are multiple instances where the movie goes out of its way to recreate very specific elements from those games. Like, there are certain camera angles in this that are straight out of the video games. And there are even moments where you get to hear Akira Yamaoka's score from the games in this movie, and where it slows down specifically so you can appreciate it. When you watch this, you can tell that the people who made this had a genuine affection for the video games and wanted to accurately capture what it was like to play it. And that's commendable, because back when this movie was made, video games virtually never got this much respect when they were turned into films. back in 2006, video games were in this weird place where they were massively popular, like they are now, but they weren't considered a legitimate form of art yet to a lot of people. They were looked at by a lot of people as something only for children and nerds. For a long time, there was absolutely a stigma associated with playing video games. It was seen as something that you were supposed to grow out of. It was not socially acceptable as an adult to say that you played Nintendo every night. And if there was ever a scene in a show or a movie in which a grown man played a video game by themselves, the subtext of that scene was always that that character was a huge loser. And so, whenever a video game would get turned into a movie, those movies were almost universally terrible, because the studios making them didn't really honor the thing they were adapting, or didn't know what was so great about it in the first place. And it's why, in the first 40 to 50 years of video games being part of pop culture, there was not a single, not one, critically acclaimed movie made that was based on a video game. Which is amazing because that sounds like an exaggeration, but it isn't. Almost all of them were terrible. And so with Silent Hill, the bar was so low for video game movies that not only could you argue that this was both the best and most faithful video game movie ever made as of 2006, it's hard to think of anything that could challenge it. This is one of the only video game adaptations in those first 40 to 50 years that did right by its source material, even with all the changes that it made. And so for that reason, this movie deserves a lot of credit. Regardless of how good or bad it is as a movie, it was years ahead of its time in how well it recreated the video game that it's based upon. Another strength that the movie has going for it is its acting, which is again notable since video game movies from this era weren't always getting major actors. Radha Mitchell is very good in this as our hero, and she does a lot of running in this. She must have been in amazing shape when she was done filming, because for the first half of the movie, she's running from something in almost every scene. Sean Bean, who you might know from The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, plays her husband in this, and he spends the whole movie trying to figure out where she went. But the best actor in Silent Hill, oddly enough, was Jodelle Ferland, who played Rose's daughter in the movie, and she turned in one of the best performances I've ever seen from a child actor. If you're like me, you normally prefer that kids not be in movies like this at all, because kids are usually terrible at acting, and the whole story then becomes about the kid, and keeping the kid alive, and it can get kind of annoying after a while. But here, Ferland was really good at reading the lines that she was given. Like, the movie gives her a full-on monologue towards the end, where it's just her talking for 5 minutes during a montage, and she manages to pull it off without it being ridiculous. It's rare that a movie will have a kid in it where the kid is actually an asset and isn't working against it. And this is one of them, regardless of whether you like her character or not. Now, the fact that she has a 5-minute monologue in this movie leads me into where Silent Hill collapses in on itself. Like I said, the movie sounds good, it looks good, outside of a couple CGI shots of the monsters where you're like, ugh, that hasn't aged well. But otherwise, it looks really good, it has good acting, and the funny thing is that the guy who wrote the screenplay for this, Roger Avary, was a very decorated writer. He was Quentin Tarantino's writing partner. He helped create both Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. And so you'd think that out of everything, the script would be the best part of this movie. And yet, it is easily its weakest. The first half of Silent Hill, I thought, was pretty damn strong. Because in the first half, you're just watching Rose run around and flee from these terrifying creatures, and it felt true to the game, and it worked well as a horror movie. It was very easy to follow. But in the second half, Rose and Sybil discover a religious cult that has existed inside Silent Hill for years, and she meets the leader of the cult, and all of a sudden, the movie becomes this giant dissertation on why these crazy things are happening, and what the history of Silent Hill is, and what Rose's daughter's connection is to Silent Hill, and this cult, and this other girl named Alyssa. And it's not just tedious, which it is, it's such a departure from the first half of the movie that it grinds the momentum of the story to a totally unnecessary halt that is not fun to sit through. The thing with the Silent Hill games is that they have a very dreamlike stream of consciousness feel to them. Things don't always make sense, and the way the characters behave is often strange and inexplicable, but you accept it. You accept that weirdness as a natural part of this world. And in the beginning of this movie, some of the things that Rose does are a little weird and hard to justify, but you can go with it a bit because, hey, it's Silent Hill, and weird things happen when it involves Silent Hill, and that's just the way it goes. So, when the movie stops to try to establish a logic to everything, it feels antithetical to what Silent Hill is all about. And what makes it worse is that logic doesn't simplify the movie, and in fact, makes it incredibly complicated. For instance, there's a scene near the end in which 3 separate versions of the same character are on screen in the same room at the same time, and it's hard to keep up with it. There came a point where I lost track of this, where this story went on one tangent too many for me, and I stopped investing myself in it. It's as though Roger Avary came up with so many ideas for the lore of this that he didn't want to part with any of them, and so he dumped them all onto the back half of the movie, and it suffers for it. I came away with the sense that this would have worked much better as a mini-series than as a movie, because there's too much crammed into this. Meanwhile, as all this is happening in Silent Hill, the movie keeps cutting away to these scenes with Sean Bean, who is valiantly trying to find his wife back in the real world, and those scenes go nowhere. They don't connect with the rest of the movie. He learns almost nothing that we don't learn ourselves in Silent Hill, and so his scenes wind up being these bizarre distractions from the main story that appear every 10 minutes or so and slow it down even more. And by the time this movie was over, I had lost almost all of my enthusiasm for it. That last hour was such a grind to get through. And it's a shame because had it followed the trajectory that it was on after the first hour, it could have ended after 80 or 90 minutes. Everything involving the cult could have been shrunk, and most of the Sean Bean stuff could have been eliminated too, and the movie would have been fine. But unfortunately, it was too ambitious for its own good. And it's a shame, because this could have been the first really, really good video game movie. The groundwork was there. And what's crazy is that even with everything I just said, this still might be the best video game movie that had ever been made at the time, which says a lot. Overall, this movie is not terrible. It's actually very well made at times, and it has really good acting, and it totally nails the atmosphere of the video games. But it gets harder to watch the longer it goes. If you're a big Silent Hill fan, or if you're a hardcore horror fan and you haven't seen this yet, I would say it's worth checking out, because the first hour of it is definitely watchable. If you're neither of those things, though, if you're merely a casual horror fan, I would say it's a coin flip if you would enjoy this. And even if you do, there might be levels to how much you enjoy it. For me, I think there are more positives than negatives, and I think it does a lot of things well, especially in the production aspect, but its story drags it down, and drags it down far in the end. So, after a decent amount of consideration, I will give Silent Hill, the 2006 movie, a generous 6.16 out of 10. And if I can explain my slightly derivative rating system for a second, I I don't exactly adhere to the Rotten Tomatoes scale or even a regular grade scale, but I do like the idea that a 6 out of 10 should be the dividing line between whether something is good by various degrees or bad by various degrees. And because I do think the good outweighs the bad with Silent Hill, I'm giving it a thumbs up, but it's like the flimsiest of thumbs ups. This is the kind of movie that you might like if you watch it, but even if you like it, you're probably also gonna think, I don't ever need to see that again.